Farmer. This is the Uncommon Conversations podcast, episode number 26. And my guest today is a very special guy who, interestingly enough, does honestly, he does a few different things. He does, I believe, scuba training. And many other things. There we are.
What's
How you
up?
doing, sir?
Feeling good. How about you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Spike Healy. I think you can do a better job of sort of telling us who you are than I can. So please introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, man. I'm just a guy. I teach scuba diving pretty regularly. Just got done in the pool in the classroom today. And I'm also a network marketer for a superfoods company. So I'm able to balance both those lives pretty well, working on a few boats occasionally down here in Florida. I think the reason you wanted to talk was that I am been on a pretty heavy news diet for the past few years. And like I mentioned, if you asked me to say, and I'm not trying to brag, this is like a weird thing to say. I don't bring it up often, but if you asked me to say who's the Republican, who's the Democrat, I wouldn't know.
That is definitely something to brag about when it comes to being disconnected from politics. Yeah, so I guess a good place to start would be what has kept you from wanting to be more engaged with politics, and what did politics mean to you sort of growing up, and how old are you?
26. So just watched my dad, who was a banker, grew up in Delaware. Watched him watch the news every night. He's not really an angry guy, so it's not like he was screaming and shouting at it, but I didn't really see a lot of value from it, and I just saw it be really repetitive and obviously negative. So woke up one day in high school, decided I just wanted to be happy, and along with that, I didn't see any reason for the news to come in. Any kind of conversations that I felt people ever brought up and through college and now was never a positive thing. It was just more of what everybody else is talking about, and it usually got them kind of frustrated. So I like to focus on what I feel I can control, my own personal health, what I eat, what I drink, what I think about, how I move, how I sleep, the activities I do. Am I having fun? And I don't see at any point in that does politics conversation come and really affect my life in a way that I could control. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah. I think more or less that's true. I like in the ideal scenario, the government has nothing to do with your everyday life and a lot of things. Obviously, with things like and it's an interesting line of debate as far as how serious the mandates that President Joe Biden just issued mandates for people to get vaccines if they're a part of a business that is 100 employees or more. But if you get tested once a week instead, that is one way where you can avoid getting the vaccine. There's not a lot of specific exclusions, or if you already had the disease and so you already have the antibodies, there's nothing really in it for that. But it should run out in 6 months. It's sort of a temporary regulatory claim on something they can do, and then it'll be fought in courts and turned down. What people don't understand is often the government, especially the executive branch, while they're deciding how they execute the law, which there shouldn't be a lot of latitude in that, but there is, they can actually act on something that's illegal and go for a bit until the courts push back and until that kind of stuff happens. So that's one example of right now, politics intruding in people's lives. But the other ways that it does it is very subtle, and it's mostly macroeconomic in nature. So when the average Joe Schmo talks about politics, they'll talk about progressive taxes or flat taxes. That's sort of the standard dividing line, and there's lots of great places to argue about that. But there's a third category entirely that is never discussed, and that's regressive taxes. That's taxes that actually burden poor people or tax people a greater percentage of their income than rich people. And those are any tax that makes a commodity or a good more expensive, or is just a flat fee. So if you're a poor person and you go to the DMV and you have to pay $10 to get your driver's license, that $10 means more to you if you're like extra money's $40 a week than if it's 4,000 bucks a week or whatever. The percentage of your income is greater when you're having to pay that. It's the same thing with gas taxes or other types of sales taxes, where your cost of living is being artificially raised, and so the tax burden is being shifted to regular people, and it raises cost of living, so everyone's more dependent. Their dollar doesn't go as far. So it's a very nefarious type of tax that's sort of masked under, well, smoking is bad, so we should tax smoking. People should be doing less emissions with gas, so we're going to tax gas consumption or whatever. There's a bunch of individual sort of explanations, but that's a subtle way in which everyday life is really affected by people, or the everyday life of people is really affected, but you wouldn't necessarily know. You would just be like, it's just gas. I'm just buying gas. Like that's what it means, in terms of like the everyday person's experience. Gas prices go up and down. So we don't think, especially in California, we don't think, what if gas was just 65 cents cheaper all the time? Because that's what, if you remove that tax, that's what it would mean. We don't ever think about that kind of stuff. So like that's something that maybe can sort of bring it more home to the average person, and then sort of can affect, people's lives. Their dollar doesn't go quite as far. But for the most part, I think people want the government to stay out of their business. So it's kind of like, where does politics fit into regular life? It's sort of supposed to be there underneath to like facilitate everyday life. So I think it's healthy, very healthy and important to be focused on life and to see it as a separate thing. But I don't know. If these jokers were doing their job, we like all the little detailed things I want to talk about, I wouldn't have to talk about because they would have been handled by the experts that allegedly know more than I do before me. But I very much believe the system is sort of designed to have two games going simultaneously. And I used to think it was just how politics work, but I didn't understand how, like, what it means. What it means in terms of like practical application. I knew that there was the show side of politics, telling the people what they want to hear, feeding into the arguments and the narratives, and keeping us in this endless back and forth news cycle. And so, I realized that and the policy were disconnected. So I recognized one I had to pay attention to, the other one was mostly a waste of time. Once I started paying attention to the policy side, I realized that's where the real game is played. And that's where the us versus the elites, the powerful cabal of rich, powerful politicians and rich, powerful business people get together to work against the everyday man's interest. That is where it happens. And so, like, a great example of this is we'll argue over the redistribution of wealth and welfare. Like, should we redistribute it in the system? No one ever talks about how you can manipulate the natural distribution of wealth, meaning the economy works a certain way. There's certain policies that can affect how the economy operates at scale. So as an example, if we only have 1,000 jobs and 1,000 people to work the jobs, we're dead even. So that, we're dead even. But if you add another 100,000, I said 1,000. So if you add another 100 to the 1,000, you now have 100 extra laborers. Those 100 extra laborers are going to now compete for the jobs and bring wages down because they're willing to take that job at a lower wage in order to get it. And then the other person gets put on unemployment, and then the taxpayer ultimately sort of carries this load. And so you have a situation where the value of labor itself is being diluted because there's too much supply being artificially added too quickly. So I want to be very careful. It's about immigration coming too quickly that creates this effect. It's not immigration at all. If we have 10,000 jobs and 1,000 people that need a job, we have 9,000 people we can now bring in through immigration to fill the slots that we have. And it would take a generation literally to raise a kid, train them to be an American laborer, and then get them to go take the job. So you can't be like, well, wages will go up and then people will have kids and then those kids will fill those slots. That would take forever. So immigration has a role to play, but it just has to be modulated within the confines of like how much we can actually afford. How many immigrants, how quickly is the question. And as long as it's not too quickly, we're not undercutting all of the labor class for the sake of, being nice to immigrants.
Dude, this is why I enjoy talking with you. You discuss things, and maybe it's because I'm never listening, but in a way that it's actually like, oh yeah, I do want to discuss that. That seems like it should be talked about, and in a way that, like, you're bringing up points that I haven't heard before. And obviously that may be obvious, like I said, because I don't listen, but oftentimes anytime I hear people talk about stuff, it is the same narrative, and like just more of repeating, like, hey, I didn't really think about this. This is just what I heard, and I'm going to repeat it back. And I noticed the same thing. Yeah, I don't watch Sports Center or anything like that, but in college, my friends wouldn't watch the news. They watch Sports Center. And there'd be one time I'd sit on the couch and I'd hear, the Ravens traded someone. And I could sit in a conversation and be like, dude, did you hear the Ravens traded someone? And they'd be like, yeah, it's crazy. And then all of a sudden I'm a part of the conversation. And that's what we do with politics often is I don't really know anything, but everyone's talking about it, which for some reason I thought we weren't supposed to talk about politics, but that's a whole thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's what we do. But I'll just repeat back what I hear, and then I'll be a part of the conversation where you've obviously put some thought into it, and not in a way where you sound smart, but in a way that you can explain it. Like, understanding how to scuba dive is one thing, but when I have to explain to other people how to do it, I have to have a better understanding of it, and I can put it into better terms. So I appreciate you for doing that on both those topics. I didn't know if you wanted me to necessarily, those are not things I've ever really thought about, because I don't know, what makes you, I guess we've talked about that a little bit, why you feel like you should play your part in that. Where, like, my part is circle around me, make sure everyone is feeling good. Whether it's
I want to bring it home real quick because I've agreed and made similar observations.
You kind of threw me off
where it's like
how well spoken you are.
Thanks. That it is very much like the 49ers versus the Raiders. Like, I grew up in northern central Cali, so we have the Bay Area, you have the Bay, you have San Francisco and Oakland. So you had the Raiders, and before the Raiders left, you have the Raiders and the 49ers. So in California, like, that rivalry is huge. And I saw the exact same, like you said, well, I have that one thing to say that shows I'm on the team and shows I care, and now I'm participating. Like, that exact same thing with politics. And for the most part, like, everyday people have to live. So, sort of answering your other question, everyday people have to focus on everyday life and living. And you don't expect the everyday person to be a mathematician. We have experts in that field. But politics is like the one area where we don't really have a lot of people, like you said, that are just trying to explain it. It's a lot of, the narratives you were talking about are either immigrants are really dangerous and bad, and it's an invasion and everything is going terrible, or immigrations are the most wholesome people and they commit no crimes and there's no bad considerations whatsoever related to immigrants. Don't you love immigrants? Do you hate immigrants? What's evil about you? Like that. Those are the narratives. It's either good, bad, and that's because that's like stage one of the conversation, and most people are happy to stay in that stage one part of the conversation. Maybe not most people, but the people that like to be in politics like to just be, I've heard this phrase, like, professors like to be 3 chapters ahead of their students. Like that's all they ever have to be, and then they can, have a career as a professor. And I'm like, that's kind of how it works, where it's like, if I have that one answer beyond what you thought, then I'm cool with where I'm at. And I think that there's just been a feeling of the political class, like in general. So why I think I'm sort of suited for this versus other people is a little bit of my life story ties into a lot of this stuff. So I experienced single parenthood from age 0 to 5, and then my mom married my biological father, and they got back together and had 3 more kids. So then we had the 2-parent household that had some abuse and some issues for sure, and we had my dad had inherited a business, so we were extremely wealthy and were really well off for like 3 or 4 years. He drove the business into the ground. We got to the point where we had no food in the house, and our fridge and our TV were plugged in by the extension cord to the house next door. Like, no food. They're only operating literally by the grace of our neighbor. And then back up to my mom, when she was a single mom now again, my dad was out of the picture. We were still trying to be connected with him, but she was just focusing on taking care of us. We were well off again. She was making close to six figures on her own, and we were going to Chuck E. Cheese every weekend, and I love their salad bar there, by the way, and things were really good. And then a whole bunch of things converged around age 15 for me. My mom, after working 2 years on a broken foot, had like severe health consequences and adrenal fatigue, and had to go on workman's comp. So now we were sort of plugged in as a whole family directly into the system. And so either the system was going to work for us or it wasn't. And I'll circle back around to that in a second. I'm a very smart person, but I hate school. And so the school system didn't really fit for me. I felt like I was either wasting my time, or I was lost, or I was just hating that I was forced to be around a bunch of people that I wouldn't choose to be around otherwise. A lot of people, the thing that sucks about social media is it's like high school never ended. Like it's a lot of the same people you would like to disconnect from, in your normal life or in a previous life that
we
you can't really get away from. You definitely can, but there's this, because we want to be social, we want to have friends, we want to be connected. There are good aspects to it, so it's this weird thing.
I definitely, we could touch on that in length, but keep going.
Okay. And so I didn't really have a good like male figure to go off of. The men in my life were like, my grandpa was a pastor, so he was sort of too serious and too distant to really like for me to relate to. And then the other men I had in my life, I didn't have a lot of respect for. So at 15, I was put on a path through my relationship with my now girlfriend, who we were friends at that time, and that's a whole nother story, of trying to become a good man and trying to grow and mature. A lot of men love to talk politics anyway, so it's sort of like, and I like ideas, so it sort of converged there in the beginning. And strength and conditioning coach by the name of Elliot Hulse taught me to really philosophically admire and respect freedom as an individual virtue, and as a way of, as a conduit or a way to truly fully express yourself. You have to be free in order to actually authentically express yourself. If you're afraid of the consequences, you're thinking about what other people will do or say, like that's interference between that. So that was really cool, and a grounding principle before I even got into politics at age 15, 16. And the school system didn't work for me. My mom ended up being taken off of workman's compensation for 1.5 years with no money. And if she chose to work, everything would be taken from us. Her health consequences, her entire case, everything. So she had 4 kids that were minors. I was too young to work. She was on workman's comp because she had been forced to work for 2 years on a broken foot. She had had multiple doctors approve that it was bullshit and this isn't how it should have gone. And they still were able to stop paying us money for 1.5 years. Like, that's pretty evil, bro. Like, that's pretty evil, man. And so early on, I realized the system was broken and did not work for what it should be working for. Years later, I talked to a workman's comp lawyer who said the system's designed to create quick payouts for the easy cases and to drag it out as long as possible so you don't have to pay the expensive cases. The education system didn't work for me. And so there were a lot of traditional paths and traditional sort of ways of going about things or whatever that didn't really align for me. I was straight edge in high school. I didn't touch drugs. I didn't want any part of that because I had some addicts in my family, and I just didn't want to risk that in for myself. And so I was very comfortable being on an island by myself, doing my own thing. All of high school is party, have fun, go, smoke some weed, whatever. I was like, I'll have some energy drinks and go home and watch YouTube videos on philosophy from Elliot Hulse. That was where I was at. And that plus once I got into politics, I just got super lucky to start collecting signatures for ballot initiatives. So like the statewide elections, it was just a job, and I just took it just by happenstance. I got it through my dad. My dad's really been good about kicking opportunities my way when he can. And so I'll just say that right now. I appreciate him for that, and that role he has played in my life. Um, and I was collecting signatures, so I had the best political experience, period, that anyone can have. I was interested in talking about it. I wasn't going to be a BS salesman, and I was dealing with everyday people concerned about the politics of the day, plugged into what's going on the local level, the higher level, the state level, and everything. And I got to see, like you said, the people that are just the fans, and then the people that are the true believers, and then the people that are the crazies, and the people that are just angry. And that, plus the fact that the petitions themselves showed me if we get the right thing, if we get the right piece of legislation together, everyday people can come together and sign it and get it into law, and the people have a mechanism for reforming the system. And this was all before I turned 18. And then I turned 18 and I realized I needed to vote. And then the question was, who do you vote for? And I spent more or less 7 years trying to answer that question. And I'm still it's an evolving thing. But for my own sake as a citizen, I've just been trying to understand these political issues because I like ideas, and I like chilling by myself listening to economics lectures and, speeches on inflation and stuff like that. Like, that's just that's my beat. For some reason, my interest, my personality, the God-given direction I was put into, which I didn't choose, is very much in this kind of a field. So I feel like I'm the right guy at the right time to be trying to do what I'm trying to do, only because no one else is doing it. Like, I'm sort of existing as a challenge to everyone who thinks they're more suited to do this than I am, all the higher ups, to be like, do better. If some Joe Schmo car detailer who, is from Central California, lived in Utah for a few years, can have, a totally new, fresh perspective on politics, what the hell have these losers been doing? Like, they get paid to do this crap. And I'm sitting here like, just like foundational stuff, like tax cuts or tax hikes. Well, the government or the economy grows the fastest when the government spends between 25 and 30% of GDP. Right? So, like, there's the game we're getting stuck arguing back and forth in, and then there's the data that just solves the argument, and then we can move on to the next step. Around 2018, I started having things that I could say. So all of this sort of has come with time. None of this was sort of obvious at any stage throughout my life. But in 2018, I started to have ideas that were unique to me, observations that were unique to me, like that, what I just said about, it's called the Ron curve, the relationship between government spending and the economic growth. It seemed like an obvious thing to look into, and I didn't even look into it until 2018. And then that sort of got me on a path of diving deeper and doing my own research instead of just listening to the smartest people I can find. And that has led me to here, where I'm trying to just affect positive change. That's what it is. So, anywho, yeah, I'll leave it there. I think that was good.
That's cool, man. I totally feel you on, like, you for whatever reason, your life went this way. We don't even really know why we were born, but that's how it went. And then you see an issue, something that's not being done right, and maybe it's moral, maybe it's not. And it's like, why is no one doing this right? Like, I have that same story with growing up with asthma. No one taught me how to breathe, and it made my sports performance my whole life really suffered, just super average. And then just read a book. Obviously, your rise to politics was a little bit more involved, but reading a book, learning to scuba dive, being a collegiate rugby player, it all like formed, and I had to get really good at it. And then I was like, wait, why is no one ever talking about the relationship between carbon dioxide and CO2? Why is no one talking about mouth breathing and nose breathing? And that's been a whole thing with this whole, I mean, I don't really know what you categorize the virus as, a respiratory something. And every time I ask my mom, I go, is anyone yet talking about that we should breathe through our nose, not our mouth, because it filters the air better? She says, what? And I'm like, exactly. I'm still frustrated then, because no one's talking about it. And I grew up breathing. They tell me to bring the inhaler. It's the breathing's not in our shoulders; it's in our stomach. And then the same thing with scuba diving. There's people that aren't teaching it right, and it comes down to the fundamentals of breathing, fundamentals of learning to dive, the fundamentals of personal growth. I didn't know you were an Elliot Holst fan. Actually, that's freaking awesome, dude. He's a beast. I've come across a lot of his work. A guy I work with too, kind of like sent him on a directional course to holistic lifestyle coaching. But a lot of these things just get brushed under the rug. And that's where a lot of our guys
Wait, so you worked with Elliot Holst back in the day?
No, sorry, a guy I work with.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Has been, like, I've only seen a few of his videos. I really like what he shares and his philosophy. Big philosophy guy, me. But no, the guy I work with has learned a lot from Elliot Holst. No, that'd be cool to work with him. Troy Casey's kind of a dude that I learn a lot from now. I don't know if you know him.
I don't, but I'll check it out. What's his name again? Sorry.
Troy Casey, the certified health nut.
Troy Casey.
He has his own ideas about freedom, but like food, water, air, the masculine energy. I did not know that the freedom was so big for you, dude, as well. That's something that I come from with, where I'm thinking freedom from substances, freedom from even when we hold our breath, that freaking CO2 buildup that causes us to freak out, freedom from finances, freedom from gravity I would love. That's why I train plyometrics and try and scuba dive. But freedom from attachments is huge.
Yeah.
Does any of this relate back to politics? Or is this kind of like what, because like these are the things that I'm so concerned about, and I understand now, knowing your background a little bit more, why you'd want to care about this stuff, because I agree a lot of these systems are broken, like the medical fields, the sick care versus health care, and that whole thing. So it makes a lot of sense that you would want to talk about this, because you do see how it relates, and we even talked about it a lot, or a little bit, but you mentioned it earlier with the supply and demand. Like when I was talking about, well, if more people demanded plastic-free alternatives and the demand grew higher for that because of education or just like whatever, just understanding of why we'd want to do that, then the supply would follow. And you talked about how if we just put a tax on it, that could possibly make a lot more impact a lot quicker than just raising the supply or the demand.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, so what you sort of mentioned there is absolutely true. Like consumers drive the decisions of business people. Like we kind of feel like we're removed from business and it just sort of happens. But the left wing is very much about boycotting. The right wing is not about boycotting, mostly because they're very pro-free market and business, and they're sort of always defending business. So I think they don't want to like taint business and politics together, or I don't know what their reasoning is. I think I disagree with it. I think in politics it's a competition. So as long as it's not immoral,
well, it doesn't have
boycotting a business, so it's like, so boycotting means you won't buy any of the products from something. So like Chick-fil-A, right? Chick-fil-A was known as like anti-gay marriage or whatever, and they've contributed to certain organizations that are considered right-wing and anti gay marriage, anti-LGBTQ or whatever. And so there's lots of left-wingers that just won't shop at Chick-fil-A because of that. But there's no sort of equivalent the other way. There's no right-wingers that are saying, Disney is supporting Black Lives Matter, which is a Marxist organization, so I'm going to not support Disney. That doesn't happen the other way. It just happens sort of the one direction. And so anyway, so like what we choose to buy is the demand for the products and the production that will show up. So like you said, if we chose non-plastic alternatives, or like, I think there's arguments to say we should get away from plastic that are health-based. But my sort of position, and I like where you're going with like the trying to get away from plastic waste, is we have biodegradable plastic already. It's just not really in major use. And that would basically be like the solution to plastic waste, is if it just degraded, if it just wasn't sort of this artificial waste that would stay forever. And so you could tax everything else to make it more expensive and make that cheaper, or you can have it where investing in that industry, you get taxed less if you invest in that industry. So it would be like any manufacturers or producers of biodegradable plastic, will pay, zero on capital gains for that. So like if you have a business that's worth 100 million and it goes up to a billion, hypothetically, if you're the stockholder and you sell your stock, you're supposed to pay a portion of that. And so that's where like the rich people make their money. And that's what really determines where capital goes. Like what businesses are producing is different than what people invest in. And so like what people will invest in is depends on what they'll get the return, like what kind of a return they're going to get for that investment. So if you had a capital gains tax credit or something where you don't pay capital gains in that industry for 10 years or 15 years, then you make a lot more money if you go into that industry. So the entire global pool of investors would focus on that one industry and develop it, meaning they're going to build actual plants to produce the plastic. They're going to build research and development entities to try to figure out what kinds of biodegradable plastics people will want, where it is in the market you'll actually insert it, and the supply will steadily grow, and the product will get cheaper and cheaper, and then eventually it's the more economic option. And so that's one way of trying to solve these issues, sort of a different way. I do think that like what people choose to buy with their own dollar does make a difference. Like you are voting with your dollar by definition, so
Sure.
it's definitely a part of it. But
because what you describe kind of there is a top-down approach, where
the
circle that I really run with and the people I work with, we try and focus more on the bottom-up approach.
Mm-hmm.
And who's to say which one is the best? We'd probably have to look at past experience of like how we.
So I think overall the bottom-up approach is the best way. So this is a universal principle actually of the world. This isn't even like politics or anything else. Decentralized systems outperform centralized systems across the board. They're more resilient. And it's mostly because you have maximum participation. Everyone can get in on the game. The cost of one person failing is that one person failing in a decentralized system. We can all learn from that, but the cost is very low. If someone in a centralized system makes a mistake and the entire system has to adopt their bad choice, the consequences are huge. And so the risk and the overall effectiveness of a decentralized system is better than a centralized one. But with this particular type of a scenario, we're talking about trying to shift not just our industry, but the global industry. And so if it's the right choice acted at scale, it can produce good things. So it would just have to be something we would have to agree is a really good thing to do, and then implement it and then see if it works. Because here's the thing, if it doesn't work, if 10 years down the road, the market share of biodegradable plastics compared to the rest is the same, then it was a failed project and we should get rid of it. That's the most important part of sort of all policy, metrics for success. And then if it fails, we pull it back. We don't just leave it.
But wouldn't the world impact, the earth impact, be a measure for success in terms of plastics?
Yeah. If you wanted to say, you could say how much plastic waste is being generated, and if we bring that number down, then that would be another metric for sure.
Like
so
these,
it just you can have many metrics for success. So what?
This is made of bamboo and hemp.
Oh, okay.
Like I don't understand why these kind of things aren't more popular. And obviously, I'm not perfect. I bought some figs, and they're in plastic, and I feel like I'm contributing just as much to the problem, because I'm like, hey, grocery store, I want more figs. And they're like, okay, we'll give them to you. And they'll give it to you in plastic. But like, if there was a way to say, like, can we get it in these packaging? So like the only way I know is to just buy more things that are in this kind of packaging. And that's where I think there could be a bridge of like someone at the top hears that, besides just me buying all that stuff, and understands, oh, you want more figs? Yeah, can we get them in a different packaging? Yeah, we will make a small change up here, and then you guys do a lot down here. But at here, it takes education. Up here, it takes, I don't even know, like... money.
So I sort of, there's this interesting line of philosophy about politics called syndicalism, which is a very, really, really like ridiculously complex word, but basically it's syndicates of monetary interest. So people that have the reason to come together to make money. Their belief is basically that that is the way the world works. And for me, I know that the laws of economics and capitalism just exist, and our intent, unfortunately, cannot influence those things. So if you want to solve something like a global industry problem, like plastic waste, even if we did the bottom-up approach where you say the consumer says, I want less plastic in my product. Tom McDonald's song has a great way of saying this. Instead of getting plastic straws wrapped in paper, you now have paper straws wrapped in plastic. Like that's how they solve the problem. And so like when you want to be a consumer at the store, right, even if you get your little container in hemp and bamboo, the shipping containers going from the distribution center to the Walmart or whatever, and the stuff going between the distribution centers and coming from overseas to here, the supply chain all the way from the bottom up, they use plastic for all sorts of things there too. And so even if like they want to make you feel like you're making the good consumer decision by showing you this thing here, you have the whole supply chain that you have to look at. So when I'm thinking about solving these things, it's like the only way to solve it is to get global industry on your side. And I think the only way to do that is to say, we'll let the people who only care about making more money make more money by doing the things the hippies want. That's my line. Make the psycho-capitalists do the work for the hippies, which is just saying, let's make it so that you make money by saving the world. That's the only sort of like, that's the simplest way to put it, is like, if you make it so the incentives are not to destroy the world, but to actually help it. But there are, so here's where I think it's like, it is centralized government, it is top down, it is all this stuff. But it's just saying you'll make a little more money if you choose to invest in this thing. It's not taxing anyone, there's no government spending involved, and it's not forcing anyone to do anything. So it is like a central action, but it's like a suggestion more than anything else. It's like, you'd make a little more money if you went in this direction, but if not, nothing else changes. No one is being forced to do anything. There's nothing. So it's like, it is top down, big government, whatever, but like in the shallowest of ways, I think. But here's the thing, like we can't, that doesn't mean that a solution like that is going to be the solution for all of our ills in society. But with specific things like the plastic versus biodegradable plastic argument, or things like trying to shift the global agricultural industry, that's so you talked about health and what you put into your body, and being concerned about those sort of things right there in your own life. The food pyramid was designed and put into our schools to make sure that we were fed cheaply. And the agricultural industry types back in the 50s and 60s were in charge of creating this program and in charge of a lot of the studies that determined which foods were safe and which ones weren't safe back in the day. And we still have issues where our studies aren't exactly objective. We're not always picking up on, like trans fats is a great example. We know trans fats causes cancer. There's this obvious sort of collective interest in wanting to get rid of it. And even when they chose to get rid of that thing, they said, get rid of it in 18 months. Like they were like, we know this causes cancer. We know it will cause cancer for the next 18 months while we still let it be out there. But we're going to, and I understand like businesses have to have time to shift. So I see both sides of it, but that first point I made speaks to a broader issue where I think if someone owns your food supply, owns your housing, and owns your preventative medicine, or I'm getting ahead of myself there. Someone owns your food supply and owns your water supply and owns your housing. And so you have, asbestos in the walls and mold in the walls, and you have weird chemicals that shouldn't be in your water, and your food is like low nutrient and very like
calorie dense.
inflammation creating. And that same person also owns the hospital where they're going to treat you for all those illnesses they just made for you.
Now you're talking my language, dude.
That's the
Before
game.
you're about to lose me on the politics, because that, I think it's a fear thing for me, because I want to operate on the assumption that if the right thing is done, then the right thing is done, and then if money comes secondary. And when I look at businesses, I'm like, if you just did the right thing, the money would come. That's been my mindset for the past 6 years. But when you're talking on the grand scale and everyone's affected, I do know that money moves the needle. So, yeah, that sucks. So a lot of times it is, we got to make the right thing, make the more money. And that's too complicated. And then I go, you guys handle it. I'm going to do it in my small circle. But this thing about the sick care system, I don't know how that relates into your world, but that is really what we're talking about, and that's the issue. And that's where we're coming in with these different packaging, the different ingredients inside that isn't just filled with junk and chemicals, and taking back, that's what Troy Casey says, is he wants sustainable food, air, water, soil, and all that. He also suffered from black mold. So, like, that is a vicious cycle. And that's where, like, we're like, can we focus on this and make sure that this thing, the old, like, put the airbag or the mask bag on the airplane on yourself first and then help somebody else. So handle your own stuff. Make sure your body's functioning properly. Help those around you. You help those around you, y'all are going to be strong. You can help the ones around you bigger. And then if we all become strong, then stuff will just work its way out. I don't know where politics comes into play there. Obviously, there's a lot of, like, policies and big corporations. But if you would draw some dots, connect some dots there. Yeah.
So, I mean, we have issues with, like, we have issues with the food supply. Like, the FDA is designed around determining whether or not the food that you're eating is too poisonous. It's not oriented around what is the optimal type of food to eat, or what's the optimal way to produce food that, like, creates optimal health for people. It's a totally different question, because it's like, if you test 100 people and see how much of this poison they can handle, like, that's one thing. And it's a totally different thing if you say, what can I do to make you function optimally? And so, like, the FDA is just fundamentally sort of oriented around the wrong thing. So for me, I'm in favor of the government mandating purity tests when it comes to manufacturing, which just means, like, and across the board, it just means what you say is in the product should be in the product. Like, that's just straight up just a purity standard. That's with drugs, that's with food, that's with whatever. And then beyond that, I think we should just, if we want to have some sort of collective answer, you could have private entities do this too. You just need to have total freedom, and then let people, and then just spend money to collect data and information and try to create information for people to make, informed decisions on things, and try to get, because when you have a system like we have, whoever can pay the FDA enough to get the thing passed through can sometimes get their thing passed through regardless of the actual data. Who is funding, the studies, where the studies come from. If the same billionaire funds all of the different things at the University of Tennessee, and then they go and they have an objective study done on this other thing, and they're also funding that, it's like, is that objective? Do we really know? Because, like, a lot, the FDA will outsource their studies to colleges and stuff like that, so that's its own thing. With the healthcare stuff, I think that, so I sort of have a one size fits all welfare solution that is, like, the only type of welfare system that I think can work. And it's a version of a UBI type system. Now, the reason why I even go that direction, one is because I do think the economy's been manipulated to keep people poor. So if you have that kind of a scenario, you can't really say, and also pull yourself out by your bootstraps. You got to make sure the system isn't working against people before you pull out what support they are getting from the system. And I'll bring it back to the situation with my mom. She was in a position where if she made the right choice and tried to find whatever job she could with her physical disability, and with whatever other things that she could manage, she would get punished for it, lose out on benefits from workman's comp, um, potentially be sued for fraud, and just have her life destroyed. If she chose to make the right decision, it would be the wrong decision. And that's like the major dysfunction of our welfare system. Like we only believe you're going to get disability when you're disabled, so you have to act disabled. If you're poor and dependent, you're only getting that money and that help when you're poor and dependent. In many cases, single moms, with a mediocre job and 3 kids in a bad neighborhood, are in a position where their kids will lose their health care if they get a better job or move, or get out of their area. Yeah, and not necessarily get out of their area. That's sort of that's unrelated. But they might lose their health care if they get a better job and they jump out of that dependency sort of portion of the income spectrum. So you have a situation where the government is treating different citizens differently depending on how they behave. We don't have equality under the law. The only way you can have a welfare system with equality under the law is if everyone got the same support regardless of how they behave. So everything else about the world sort of stays the same, but you have more resources to work with. So like, if you want to save more money, if you want to get a better house, if you want to move to a better neighborhood, if you want to have a better life and have more money, if you have no welfare, you have all these decisions before you that will put you on that right path. If you have a UBI where you're getting, so for me, it would be like $250 a month from the state. It would be at the state level, not the federal level, just because I don't think Texas would be down for this kind of thing, and I don't really care to like force it on people. It's just my own idea of a different way to do welfare. You now have that $250 a month, but the government isn't telling you what you have to do and what you don't have to do. So now it's still up to you to make the right decisions and to go out there and to get the better job, get the credentials, get the training, whatever it is. You're still free. You're still the government isn't controlling your life, and all of your incentives are the same, only you have more resources to start off with. And so I think a UBI could actually work, even though it seems totally anti-freedom, anti-small government. It's the only way in which the government is going to tax people, redistribute that money, and then give it to citizens in an equal and fair way. Because the issue is right now it's like we're taxing some and giving to some, when it should be like taxing all and then giving to all, and the government has a sort of neutral effect. Now, the obvious question is if we can just start voting ourselves money, where does that end? That this is where that 25% to 30% of GDP comes in. That's a natural limitation on government spending that anyone who cares about being remotely thoughtful or objective can respect and understand. Like the data shows that if you want more government revenue or you want more economic activity and growth, they both meet at this sort of central 25 to 30% range of government spending as a percentage of GDP. So you could find that limit on the UBI just by recognizing we have this cap on spending already. And so we have military and courts and administrators and all this stuff. And then whatever's left over is what we can sort of be flexible with. And within that is what we could sort of do attempt this sort of UBI program. Now, that is not the optimal way to situate society. I think the optimal way to situate society is with no welfare at all, so that people are taught to be as independent as possible, and charity and things like that are much more common, like they used to be than they are now. Like collectivist hospitals, sort of run by churches, were the norm back in the day, where if you were a member of the church, you would just go to the church's little set of doctors and nurses and get your treatment, and it was all paid for by the community without the government being involved at all. And so those kinds of shared coverage type of systems have existed voluntarily and without the government at all. So I think ultimately and ideally, that's where we want to go. But if we have a bunch of people that are dependent on government money now, to just say, let's get rid of it, that will never happen. No one will ever vote to just say, get rid of welfare altogether. But if there's this transitionary alternate program that the people that want welfare can say it's still doing the job, and the people who don't like this version of welfare can say it's an improvement, we can find common ground and take that step forward. And so that would sort of, so bringing it full circle to the healthcare thing, we recognize like healthcare is super important, but the government and big business have gotten in cahoots with each other, mainly the insurance companies, to make it so that like premiums and what consumers pay is going to be too high. What they actually get in the background is going to be a little bit too low in terms of coverage and benefits. And we pay more. So allegedly we're this free market, we bring the prices down system. We're not a free market healthcare system in the United States. We actually aren't. The government's super involved in this, but the alleged theory is if it was a free market system, prices would be cheaper and all this stuff. We pay 2 or 3 times what other countries pay on average for our healthcare. And it's not because the quality is that much greater. We do get more space. We have more like less people per room here than many other countries. And there are lots of other factors to sort of take into account. But the main issue with our healthcare system is that it's all controlled and like hyper regulated, and there's just this, there's no function to it economically. So like when a normal economy or business when a normal industry or business is operating, you have the prices, they're already like listed. We don't have that with healthcare. You have a relative sense of what the different prices are between the different options. Burger King, McDonald's, whatever. We don't have that. And then when you go in, you don't actually negotiate prices because you're not paying them. You get your goods and services up front, not knowing what they cost. And then they decide what they're going to charge you. And then it's actually 2 corporations in the background deciding how all of the stuff works. And then eventually the insurance company decides to raise your premiums and raise your deductibles and raise your cost of accessing your healthcare. So it's all dysfunctional and sort of separated by government being a little too involved. And so for the most part, I'm just in favor of bringing all of this stuff out of government control and trying to just sort of reset the system in a much more free and open way. And overall, because of the brilliance of science and modern Western understanding of the world and the scientific method, we've given up all traditional wisdom, traditional herbal medicines, traditional anything, any idea, any concept that there's anything but a material answer to our. And here's the thing, what you're talking about with your breathing stuff, it sort of is still the material world in a sense, so it should sort of fit in their worldview, but it's really not even materialism. It's like the scientific religion of modern Western civilization versus any of the other ways in which you could potentially heal your body, including the ways in which it naturally heals itself, which we know, like if you get a scratch, it naturally heals itself. So it would make sense there would be other areas in which it does this. And the entire field of Eastern medicine is like dead to the Western world. But in the Eastern world, they're like, they know what's up. So they don't have big pharma. They don't have a lot of these issues because a lot of these problems were solved centuries ago. And you can make a lot of money bringing them back. And so I think partially we just need to have a more open mind with Eastern medicine. And also, this is unrelated, but related, just what you can do, what the everyday person can do, is get the fighting between the people to stop. Because, like, who that you've ever met would think that it's okay for a cop to abuse a citizen? But the Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, all this sort of stuff. Even like, do you think cops are great, or do you think we should get rid of them? Like, that is all BS. We all think cops should enforce the law, not abuse citizens, and if they do, hold them accountable. There is no disagreement. There's no disagreement, but that's like the most controversial issue of our time right now with all the protests and marches and everything that happened last year. It's like this hot topic debate, and there is no disagreement. It's just right-wingers don't understand that cops get away with doing illegal things sometimes, and that's not always okay. And left-wingers got to understand that criminals are much bigger dangers than cops, even to black people. Half of all homicide victims in the United States are black. So criminals are a much bigger concern than cops, even if you want to say there should be concern for cops. So like, and I just sort of articulated from their perspectives how it's all nonsense, not just sort of from the central position. Because like, that's sort of the magic of this is going to sound really bad, the magic of me, because I have listened to both sides and I care about understanding what they've said and the value in what they have to say. So I can actually say, yeah, you're onto something. Yeah, you're onto something. And this is what I think, you know, about everything else. And so if you could replicate that in your own life, to just say, look, bro, like, I don't hate you. You don't hate me. We're Americans. We love each other. We want this to work out. Let's try to just talk about solutions. That is the best way any everyday person, and all of us, including me, you, the homeless dude down the street, that's how we can all sort of unite. That's how we unite the country. That's how we fix these problems, is by reframing us as Team America before we say Team Democrat or Team Republican.
And you've done that with me. I share briefly a little bit with a lot of people who are talking politics, and I say, I don't really care. And then they go, you need to care. And I didn't care when I was your age, and now I care, and this is why you should care. But you didn't do that with me, man. You listened to me. You asked me, like, what I actually do care about, and then showed me, hey, there's things that you care about. There's a reason that what I care about and what you care about are similar, and here's why. And you bridged a connection. And you're actually listening. The same with that argument you just brought up. You're listening, and you're seeing both sides, and you're communicating. You've gotten some amazing communication skills. I don't know where those were born from.
My mom definitely, she's a very articulate woman, very educated. So I was blessed to have someone like that in my life that helped. And listening to a lot of smart people, and I like talking. I'm really into ideas, and I'm naturally extroverted. So it's like a good combo where I just genuinely enjoy talking ideas and talking about these things. So it's practice. And to your earlier point about, like, can you teach something? Can you communicate it well? I don't know if Albert Einstein said this back in the day, but I heard the quote attributed to him that the measure of mastery is not your ability to do something, but your ability to explain it to someone else. Your ability to get them to do it. And so whether that's true or not, what that ultimately means, what philosophically, whatever, I just said it's extremely valuable to be able to articulate yourself well and communicate things well. And not everyone is born with the same desire, capacity, interest, or inclination to this kind of thing. So it's not even like a hierarchy or a competition where I'm like, yay, I'm winning. I'm just like, yeah, I can talk. Just talking. I don't know. Yeah. Like it's like I'm just talking like other people. I just have a few extra words and a couple extra ideas to use. So that's basically it. I really hated growing up, because I was a smart kid. I really hated growing up older people that would treat you like you're dumb because you don't know their vocabulary. And that was literally it. It's like, you literally just have more experience learning words than I do, and you think I'm a moron. Like, that's so stupid. That's so stupid. There's so many kids that are bright and will understand what you're talking about, even with this, like, political stuff. Like, if you're a good communicator of these issues, and I say I'm one of the better ones, you don't have to be a genius everyday citizen to sort of get the gist of what I'm talking about, because it's not. It's the trickery that is complicated. It's not the actual, like, answers. Like, yeah, these are complicated issues. Yeah, it takes a while to absorb them intellectually. I'm 10 years into trying to understand politics, so, like, everyone should just, have some patience with themselves. Like, I've been into it, and I'm still, like, I understand policy, and I think that gives me, like, a superpower. But a lot of the other stuff, and a lot of the history and the details and the activists and the personalities and that stuff, I don't know anything about. I was just talking to a guy today who told me about a guy who was a big-time gay marriage advocate back in the day and was sort of the godfather of that whole movement. And I was like, I didn't even know his name. Like, I didn't even know that. So it's not like I'm some bastion of all the knowledge in the universe either. I just had a pretty good focus on policy, and I think that has helped me put aside the BS and hone in on what is meaningful about politics is again, sort of bringing it full circle. What it means to the everyday person is actually like what matters in politics. We're about to hit the 1 hour mark, so we'll cut it off here, hop right back on. I'll see you in a minute, sir.
Solid.